Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Dr. Emmett Graves didn't notice. His attention was fixed on the oscilloscope display, watching the waveform that shouldn't exist. The Deep Space Listening Station in northern Canada was supposed to pick up signals from distant galaxies, pulsars, the background hum of the universe. Not this. The signal pulsed with an organic rhythm, rising and falling like breath. Like something alive was on the other end, exhaling across impossible distances. Emmett had been alone on the night shift for 6 months now, ever since the funding cuts reduced staff to a skeleton crew. He preferred it that way. Fewer people meant fewer questions about why he sometimes stayed for double shifts, chasing phantom signals that his colleagues dismissed as terrestrial interference. Fewer sideways glances when he'd mention hearing patterns in the noise that no one else could perceive. But this was different. This was real. He adjusted the frequency, trying to isolate the source. The station's array of dishes pointed skyward, but the triangulation software kept giving him impossible readings. The signal wasn't coming from space. It was coming from Earth. But the location kept shifting, jumping thousands of miles in seconds, as if the source was everywhere and nowhere at once, as if it was coming from beneath reality itself. Emmett pulled on his headphones and listened. At first, it sounded like static, the hiss and crackle of radio interference. Then underneath, he heard voices. Human voices, but they were wrong. The cadence was reversed, words spoken backward yet somehow still intelligible to a part of his brain that predated language. It was like listening to an echo of speech before the original sound was made. And then, cutting through everything else, clear as a bell, he heard his own name. Not someone saying Emmett. His own voice, his exact inflection, his particular way of pronouncing the double T at the end. Speaking to him across an impossible distance, from a place that shouldn't exist. His hands shook as he started the recording equipment. The temperature in the station seemed to drop 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the inside of the windows, spreading in patterns that looked almost like words in a language he'd never seen. On the monitor, the waveform began to spike erratically, forming a pattern that his mind kept trying to interpret as text, as meaning, as something just beyond his ability to comprehend. Emmett worked through the rest of the night, recording everything, taking notes that became increasingly frantic. His handwriting deteriorated as exhaustion set in, but he couldn't stop. Every time he tried to step away, the signal would shift, revealing new layers, new fragments of meaning hidden in the noise. By the time dawn broke over the frozen landscape, painting the ice in shades of pink and gold that looked wrong somehow, he'd filled 17 pages of his notebook and had 3 hours of audio that would either make him famous or get him committed. The last entry in his notebook, scrawled at 5:47 a.m, read simply, "They know I'm listening." He knew exactly who to call. 3 days later, Emmett stood in a laboratory in Geneva that officially didn't exist. Dr. Astrid Keller worked in a sub-basement of CERN that wasn't on any floor plan, accessible only through a maintenance corridor that required 3 separate security clearances. The first 2 guards he'd passed hadn't asked questions. The third had looked at him with something like pity. "You look terrible," Astrid said when she saw him. She was a small woman in her 50s with steel grey hair and the intense gaze of someone who'd spent decades staring at things most people couldn't perceive. Her left hand trembled slightly, a condition that had started 5 years ago and that no doctor could explain. I haven't slept since I recorded this." Emmett handed her the drive containing his findings. His fingers left dark smudges on the metal surface. He'd stopped washing his hands regularly, afraid he'd miss something if he stepped away from his equipment for even a few minutes. "Tell me I'm not losing my mind." Astrid plugged the drive into her computer and listened. Emmett watched her face carefully. They'd known each other for 15 years, ever since they'd been on the same research team studying anomalous electromagnetic phenomena at MIT. While the rest of the team had moved on to conventional careers, publishing papers about solar radiation and magnetospheric dynamics, Astrid had gone deeper, following threads that led to questions no one wanted to ask. She'd been the first to suggest that some signals they were receiving weren't coming from space at all, but from somewhere adjacent to reality. The rest of the team had laughed. Emmett had stayed quiet, but he'd kept her notes. After 10 minutes, she removed her headphones and looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Her left hand had stopped trembling. "I need to show you something," she said. She led him through another locked door into a room that was part library, part museum of the unexplained. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and corkboards were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by red string. But it was more than that. There were objects here too. A compass that pointed in directions that didn't exist. A clock that ran backward every third Thursday. A photograph that showed different things, depending on what time of day you looked at it. "I've been tracking incidents like yours for 2 years, Astrid explained, pulling out a thick folder. The edges were worn from constant handling. Unexplained transmissions, temporal anomalies, objects appearing in places they shouldn't be. All of it suppressed, dismissed, or lost by institutions that should have been investigating." She spread photographs across a table. One showed a city street Emmett recognized, Times Square in New York. But something was wrong. The buildings were in the wrong places. Structures he'd never seen stood where he knew other buildings should be, and the people in the photograph, the pedestrians walking through the frame, they were all facing the same direction, all frozen mid-step, all wearing expressions of absolute terror. "This was taken in 1967, Astrid said. "The photographer thought he'd made a mistake, double-exposed the film. But every photograph from that roll showed the same thing. New York, but wrong." "And the photographer?" "He disappeared 2 weeks after developing these images. His apartment was found empty, completely cleaned out. No forwarding address, no trace. But his darkroom was left untouched, and on the wall, written in developer fluid, were the words, 'They showed me what we become.'" Another photograph showed an archaeological dig site in Turkey. In the foreground, a team of researchers stood around something partially excavated from the soil. Emmett picked up a magnifying glass and examined it. The object appeared to be made of metal, corroded and ancient, covered in a patina that suggested thousands of years of burial. But the shape was too precise, too manufactured. It looked like a piece of circuitry. But the design was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The connections were organic, flowing, as if the metal had grown rather than been assembled. "That's from a site dated to 8000 BCE, Astrid said. "The artifact you're looking at is made from an alloy that shouldn't have existed for another 10,000 years. But that's not the strangest part. When they analysed it, they found that the corrosion pattern was wrong. The object had been buried, yes, but the deterioration suggested it had been exposed to atmospheric conditions that don't exist on Earth. Higher radiation levels, different chemical composition in the air." She pulled out more images. A fossilized footprint in stone dated to millions of years before humans evolved, but the print was from a modern running shoe. A manuscript from medieval Europe that contained technical diagrams for devices that wouldn't be invented for centuries. A series of cave paintings from Australia that depicted beings in what looked unmistakably like spacesuits, dated to 40,000 years ago. The dig was shut down within days, Astrid continued. The site was declared contaminated. Most of the research team was reassigned to other projects, scattered across the globe. 3 of them died within a year. 1 drove his car off a bridge. 1 had a heart attack despite being in perfect health. 1 simply disappeared. Emmett felt his pulse quicken. How many incidents are we talking about? 73 that I've been able to verify. Hundreds more that I'm still investigating. Astrid's face was grim. And that's just what I've found. She pulled out another file, this one marked with a red stamp. Antarctica, 1978. There's one case that stands out above all the others, she said quietly. A research expedition led by Dr. Bernard Holloway. He was drilling ice cores, looking for climate data. Instead, he found something impossible. She handed Emmett a photocopy of a journal entry. The handwriting was precise but grew increasingly erratic as the entries progressed, as if the writer's hand had been shaking more with each word. Emmett read aloud. Day 43. We've reached a depth that should represent roughly 100,000 years of accumulated ice. What we found at this level defies explanation. There are objects here, manufactured objects, not simple tools. These show sophistication, technology we can't begin to understand, but they're degraded, corroded by time beyond anything I've ever seen. How is this possible? Humanity shouldn't exist at this depth. We shouldn't exist. The entries continued for several more days, each one more disturbed than the last. Emmett could see Holloway's mental state deteriorating in real time through the words on the page. Day 46. We've extracted 3 complete objects now. They're beautiful in their own way, but looking at them fills me with a dread I can't explain. Martinez, our linguist, has been trying to decode the markings. He says they make him feel like he's remembering something he never learned. Day 48. Something is happening to the team. We all feel it. At night we hear sounds from the drilling site. Voices. Human voices speaking in a language none of us know, yet somehow we all understand fragments of it. Collins has started sleepwalking. We found him at the drilling site at 3 a.m, staring down into the hole. When we woke him, he said he'd been dreaming of cities. Empty cities more beautiful than anything we've ever built. Day 50. Martinez is insisting we seal the site and leave immediately. Last night, I saw something in the ice. A reflection, but not of anything in the chamber with me. It showed a place I'd never been. A room filled with light, and in that room, I saw myself. But I was different, changed, and I was screaming. The final entry was dated December 15th, 1978. We are not the first. We are the echo. Something came before us, something that walked this earth and built things we've only just begun to imagine. But what happened to them? Where did they go? Tonight, Collins heard voices coming from the drilling site calling our names. I'm ordering the site sealed until we can bring in more support. We're dealing with something beyond our understanding. Something that doesn't want to stay buried. What happened to them? Emmett asked, though part of him already knew the answer would offer no comfort. Astrid's face was grim. Holloway and his entire team disappeared. The station was found abandoned on December 18th. No sign of struggle, no bodies. Their equipment was still running, their personal effects were all there, food still warm on the table, but the people were gone, vanished completely. She pulled out crime scene photographs. The abandoned research station looked peaceful. Coffee cups sat on tables. A book lay open on a bed. A chess game was in progress. Everything suggested people who'd simply stood up and walked away. But they never had. The international community sealed the site under the Antarctic Treaty, Astrid continued. Officially structural instability. Unofficially, no one has been allowed within 5 miles since. There's a permanent exclusion zone. The few satellite images I've obtained show a permanent installation there now, staffed year-round. Emmett sat down heavily. What do you think is happening? I have theories, Astrid said. None of them are comforting. But I think your recording might be the key to understanding all of this. And I think we need to follow Holloway's trail. There are other researchers who are investigating similar phenomena. One of them is still active. She's working in Svalbard. The seed vault. Astrid nodded. She's found something in the genetic records. Something that supports a theory I've been afraid to voice. What theory? Astrid looked at him for a long moment. That we're not living in the original timeline. That somewhere, somehow, reality split. And we're living in the echo of what should have been. 2 days later, they were on a plane to Norway. The flight gave Emmett time to think, though he wasn't sure that was a good thing. He kept reviewing everything Astrid had shown him, trying to make sense of it. But the more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Or rather, it made too much sense in ways that terrified him. He'd brought his laptop and spent hours analysing his original recording, running it through software that isolated different frequency bands. And he found them. Hundreds of patterns. Layers of meaning buried in what he'd initially thought was noise. At one point, about 40 minutes into the recording, he isolated a section that, when played at the right frequency, sounded like music. Not any music he recognised, but music nonetheless. A melody that made him feel profoundly sad in a way he couldn't explain. Homesick for a place he'd never been. He fell asleep somewhere over the Atlantic and dreamed of empty cities. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault sat buried in a mountain on the island of Spitsbergen, one of the most remote locations on Earth. The entrance looked like something from science fiction. A concrete portal leading into the mountain itself, surrounded by permafrost and eternal cold. Dr. Priya Sharma met them at the entrance. She was a woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that held a wariness Emmett recognised. She'd seen something that changed her. Dr. Keller said you'd be coming, Priya said, leading them through the security checkpoints. Her voice was quiet, controlled. I wasn't sure I should talk to anyone about this. I've already been warned twice by my supervisors to keep my findings to myself. The vault was kept at 18 degrees, below zero, their breath clouded in the frigid air as Priya led them past rows of boxes containing seeds from every corner of the globe. I started noticing anomalies about a year ago, Priya explained. Seeds that didn't match their supposed origin. Genetic markers that made no sense. At first, I thought it was contamination. But the more I tested, the more inconsistencies I found. She stopped at a workstation and pulled up images on a computer screen. Microscopic views of plant cells, DNA sequences, growth charts. These seeds came from a collection in Brazil, dated to 1962, Priya continued. There's supposed to be a variety of maize that went extinct in the 1970s. But when I sequenced their DNA, I found something impossible. These plants had evolved resistance to a specific type of fungal infection. Not any fungus that exists in our world. The genetic adaptation is there, coded into their DNA. But the threat it evolved to counter never existed. She pulled up more data. Evolution doesn't work that way. Species adapt to environmental pressures that exist, not to theoretical ones. But I've found dozens of examples throughout the vault. Plants adapted to survive droughts that never happened in their regions. Seeds with resistance to chemical compounds that were never introduced. Flowers that evolved colorations to attract pollinators that don't exist in nature. She pulled out a classified file she'd smuggled from the restricted archives. Inside were botanical records going back decades, all marked with red flags. Someone knew about this, Priya whispered. These records show researchers have been finding these inconsistencies since the vault opened. but every attempt to investigate was shut down. Every researcher who pushed too hard was reassigned or dismissed. One botanist, who wrote a paper about these anomalies, was institutionalized. Astrid leaned forward. "You said these plants evolved to survive something that never happened here. Those are your exact words." "Yes," Priya confirmed. "What if they didn't evolve here?" Astrid said quietly. "What if these seeds are from somewhere else, not geographically, somewhere else entirely?" Before Priya could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed. A voice over the intercom announced a security breach. "We need to go," Priya said urgently. "Take these." She thrust the documents into Emmett's hands. "Find out what's happening." They ran. In the rental car racing away from Svalbard, Emmett finally looked at the documents. Among the botanical records was a handwritten note. The paper yellowed with age. "If you're reading this, then you've started to see the truth. They told me to stop looking, but I couldn't. The seeds aren't wrong. Our world is. I found the proof in the ice buried deep where no one thought to look. We split somewhere in the distant past. 2 Earths, 2 timelines, 2 versions of humanity. But only one of us stayed physical. The other became something else, something terrible. And now they're trying to come back, Millbrook, Montana. That's where it started in our time. If you want to understand what's coming, go there. But be careful, once you know, you can't unknow. Once you see it, you become part of it." The note was signed B. Holloway and dated December 14th, 1978, one day before his final journal entry. Astrid booked them on the next flight to the United States. They landed in Seattle and rented a car for the drive to Montana. Neither spoke much during the journey. Astrid worked on her laptop, running simulations. "It's possible," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just theoretically, actually possible. If certain conditions were met at a specific point in history, reality could diverge into multiple paths. Both streams would continue forward, both would be equally real, but they'd be separate." "Until now," Emmett said. "Until now," she agreed. "Something is breaking down the barriers." They reached Millbrook, Montana, just after sunset on a Friday evening. The town appeared suddenly around a bend in the highway, as if it had been hiding. Population 1,200, according to the welcome sign. Main Street consisted of a diner, a gas station, a hardware store, and a sheriff's office. The mountains loomed in the distance, purple and black against the darkening sky. They checked into the town's only motel, a rundown place called the Silver Pine. The clerk, an elderly man with cloudy eyes and shaking hands, barely looked at them as he handed over keys. "You folks passing through?" he asked in a monotone, as if the question was a script he'd recited 1,000 times. "Just here for a couple days," Emmett replied, "doing some research." The clerk's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flash of what might have been warning. "Research? Right. Welcome to Millbrook. Peaceful town. Nothing much happens here." He paused. "You'll want to be in your room by 9:30. Most folks prefer to be settled by then." "Why's that?" Astrid asked. His hand trembled harder. "Just a local custom." That evening they ate at the diner. The place was called Maggie's, according to the faded sign. The interior was stuck in a time warp, all vinyl booths and formica tables. The locals who came in stared at them with undisguised suspicion but said nothing. There were maybe 15 people, and none of them spoke to each other. They ate in silence, their movements oddly synchronized. One man would lift his coffee cup, and a moment later 3 others would do the same. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 40s named Linda, took their order without small talk. Her eyes were hollow, dark circles underneath, suggesting years of poor sleep. "Friendly place," Emmett muttered after she left. "They're afraid," Astrid observed. "Everyone here is afraid." At exactly 9:47 p.m, everything changed. Linda had been refilling their coffee. Mid-pour, she stopped. The stream of coffee hung in the air for a moment, then she carefully set down the pot and walked to the window. Her eyes were open but vacant. Her mouth moved silently. Around them, everyone in the diner did the same thing. The cook came out from the kitchen, the other customers. They all walked to the windows and stared out into the darkness. Emmett grabbed his phone and started recording. The people stood perfectly still, their lips moving in unison, their eyes reflecting the streetlights like mirrors. It was like watching sleepwalkers caught in the same dream. There was something in their expressions, a kind of desperate yearning, as if they were reaching for something just beyond their grasp. He could hear them now, a low susurrus of voices. "We are here, we are listening, we are ready," over and over, for 11 minutes exactly. Then it ended. Linda blinked, looked at the coffee pot, and continued pouring as if nothing had happened. The others returned to their seats. No one spoke about it. No one acknowledged that anything unusual had occurred. Emmett and Astrid left money on the table and walked back to their motel in silence. "Did you see that?" Emmett whispered once they were in their room. Astrid nodded, her face pale. "We need to find out how long this has been happening." The next morning, they went to the local library. The librarian was a young woman named Emma. Unlike the other residents, she seemed more alert, more present. When they entered, she looked up with surprise and something else. Relief. "You're the visitors staying at the Silver Pine," she said. "Yes," Emmett confirmed. "We're doing historical research about the town." "What kind of research?" "Unusual events," Astrid said carefully. "Particularly anything from the early 1980s. For a long moment, Emma stared at them. Then she stood, walked to the door, locked it and flipped the closed sign. "You're here about the windows," she said quietly. Emmett and Astrid exchanged glances. "The windows?" "That's what my grandmother calls it, the window watching. It started before I was born, 1983. Every night at 9:47, every single person in this town stops and goes to the nearest window. We stand there for 11 minutes and I don't know what we do, none of us remember it afterward. It's like those 11 minutes just disappear from our minds." She pulled out old newspapers from the archives. The editions from early 1983 were surprisingly detailed. "March 3rd, 1983, Emma read. "Multiple witnesses report seeing a bright object falling from the sky around 8:30 p.m. Impact estimates somewhere in the woods, north of town." She pulled out the next edition. "Search parties located the impact crater approximately 6 miles north. Site shows all signs of high-velocity impact. Burned trees, scattered debris, significant crater. However, no meteorite or other object has been recovered. Crater appears to be empty." The next edition was dated March 7th, and the tone had changed dramatically. "Strange phenomenon reported in Millbrook. Beginning at approximately 9:47 p.m. on March 6th, multiple residents report experiencing a period of missing time, most unable to account for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. The editions continued, documenting the growing realization that whatever had started on March 6th wasn't stopping. "Did they find the meteorite?" Astrid asked. Emma shook her head. "They found the crater, burned trees, all signs of impact. But no meteorite, just empty earth. And that night, at 9:47 p.m, everyone in town walked to their windows for the first time. My grandmother says people tried to fight it at first. They'd leave town before 9:47, drive miles away. But when the time came, they'd pull over, get out, and face back toward Millbrook. Eventually, everyone just accepted it." "Has anyone ever refused to participate?" Emmett asked. Emma's expression grew darker. "My uncle tried. He locked himself in his basement, chained himself to the water heater. When my grandmother found him the next morning, he was standing at the basement window. The chains were still locked, but he'd somehow slipped out. His wrists were torn up, bleeding, but he didn't remember any of it. Can we see the impact site? Astrid asked. I'll take you, Emma said, but we need to be back before nightfall. They spent the rest of the day investigating. The impact site was still visible in the woods, marked by trees that had grown in twisted, unnatural shapes. The trunks spiraled, branches growing at impossible angles. The crater itself was 20 feet across, filled with rainwater. Emmett stared at the water, and his blood went cold. The reflection was wrong. The water reflected the sky above, but it wasn't the same sky. The clouds moved in different directions, and in the corner of the reflection, just visible, were structures, buildings, a city that didn't exist in the real world but was clearly visible in the reflected one. Do you see it? He asked Astrid. I see it, she confirmed, her voice shaking. Emma stood back from the crater. The reflection is always wrong, always showing somewhere else. My grandmother says it's a window, a hole between here and there. They took samples and set up recording equipment. The readings were off the charts, electromagnetic fluctuations that made no sense, radiation signatures that didn't match any known source. And underneath it all, that signal. The same one from his listening station, but stronger. It thrummed in his bones, filled his head with whispers just below the threshold of understanding. As they worked, Emmett became aware they were being watched. He couldn't see anyone, but he felt eyes on them. Multiple sets of eyes, observing from the trees, from the shadows. We need to go, Emma said suddenly. Now, it's almost sunset. They didn't argue. That afternoon they met with Sheriff Raymond Cook. His office was small and cluttered. Cook himself was a heavy-set man in his 60s who looked like he'd stopped trying to understand the world a long time ago. I know why you're here, he said. You want to know about the watching. The answer is always the same. We don't know, and we stopped trying to figure it out. But you must have theories, Emmett pressed. 42 years of this. Cook's expression hardened. Oh, people investigated. Doctors, scientists, government folks. They came, they tested, they measured. Then they left and told us to keep quiet. Said it was for our own good. And you just accepted that, Astrid challenged. Cook walked to his window. We learned to live with it. That's what you do when you don't have a choice. Whatever happened that night in 1983, it changed this town. But we're still here, still alive. That's more than some towns can say. What do you mean? Emmett asked. Cook turned to face them. There were other meteorite sightings that year. Other towns. Some of them aren't on maps anymore. I've driven to some of these places. They're still there. The buildings. All intact, like everyone just walked away. But there's no sign of what happened to the people. They're just gone. He pulled out a folder, spreading photographs across his desk. Abandoned towns, empty streets. But in every photo, Emmett noticed the same thing. The windows. All the windows in every building were broken from the inside out. We're the lucky ones, Cook continued. Whatever we're doing, when we watch, it keeps us here. And I suggest you two leave before tonight, unless you want to become part of this place permanently. Once you participate, once you feel that pull, you never fully leave. They didn't leave. That night they set up equipment in their motel room. Cameras pointing out the window, audio recorders, electromagnetic sensors. At 9:45 p.m. the air changed. It became heavier, thicker. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Their equipment began registering anomalies. At 9:47 p.m. exactly, Emmett felt it. It started as a whisper in the back of his mind, then became a pull, like a hand reaching into his chest and tugging him toward the window. He tried to resist, but his body moved of its own accord. He stood at the window, his mouth forming words he didn't choose. Next to him, Astrid did the same. Through the glass, he could see other windows filled with faces. Every person in Millbrook, speaking in unison. We are here, we are listening, we are ready. But this time, Emmett was aware. He could feel what was happening, could sense the connection being made. It was like a bridge spanning an impossible distance, and on the other end, something was listening. Not something. Someone. Thousands. Millions. All reaching out, trying to make contact, trying to find their way back. In that moment, Emmett understood. It wasn't language. It was a signal, a response to something calling from another version of reality. Can we come home? And every night the people of Millbrook answered, we are here, we are listening, we are ready. They were saying yes. When the 11 minutes ended, Emmett gasped and stepped back. He looked at Astrid and saw his own horror reflected in her eyes. We need to go, she said, now. They packed and drove through the night, not stopping until they were 3 states away. Only then, at an anonymous highway rest stop in Wyoming, did they speak. It's not taking them, Emmett said. They're volunteering. Every night they're opening themselves up, offering to become conduits. For consciousness that doesn't have bodies anymore, Astrid said. The people of Millbrook aren't being controlled. They're being asked, and they're saying yes. They reviewed their recordings. The audio was mostly static, but underneath, they could hear voices. When Emmett isolated the frequency and filtered the noise, they could make out meaning. We are still human. We lost our way. Please let us return. Please give us form again. We are so alone. We remember what it was to breathe, to touch, to feel weight and warmth. We gave it all up. Thought we were becoming something better. But we were wrong. Please let us come home. Emmett felt tears running down his face. The message was desperate, sad beyond measure. These entities weren't invaders. They were refugees, exiles from their own evolution, begging to be allowed back into the physical world they'd abandoned. But the cost of that return would be everything. Back in Geneva, Astrid's laboratory felt different. The walls felt thinner, as if the room existed in a space between worlds. Emmett hadn't slept properly since Millbrook. Every night at 9:47, he felt the pull. He'd wake standing at whatever window was nearest, his mouth forming those silent words. The first time, he'd been terrified. By the 5th time, he'd started to accept it. He was connected now, part of the network. It's spreading, he told Astrid one morning. Whatever happened in that town, I brought it back with me. That's not possible, Astrid said, but she didn't sound convinced. You were only exposed for 11 minutes. That was enough. Emmett showed her his notes. He'd been tracking news reports. Synchronicity events are increasing worldwide, not just in remote towns anymore. Major cities, Tokyo, London, New York. The media is calling it mass hysteria, flash mobs, but it's none of those things. He pulled up a map marked with dozens of red dots. Each represented a documented incident. Look at the pattern. It started in isolated locations, but now it's everywhere, and the frequency is increasing. Astrid studied the map. It's not random, these locations are forming a network, like nodes in a web. They spent the next week analysing everything. It was Astrid who finally saw it. The reflections, she said one night, spreading photographs across her desk. Look at the reflections. Every incident they documented had them. In windows, mirrors, puddles, any reflective surface. And in every case, the reflection showed something slightly different from reality. She pulled up the photograph from the 1963 Moscow Physics Laboratory. In the window behind the researchers, the reflection showed a different scene. Buildings that had never been built. A skyline that didn't match Moscow's architecture. And if you looked carefully, you could see people in that reflected world. Shadows of human forms moving through those impossible streets. I always assumed these were artifacts, Astrid said. But what if they're not? What if reflections are showing us something real? Emmett enhanced the image on her computer. The more he looked, the more details emerged. The architecture was advanced. sleek towers of glass and metal that seemed to defy gravity, bridges suspended between buildings with no visible support, but the streets below were empty, no cars, no pedestrians, just those shadows, those faint suggestions of human forms flickering between visible and invisible. It's the same in all of them, Astrid continued, pulling up more images. Different locations, different decades, but the reflections always show the same thing. An advanced civilization, beautiful, perfect, and completely empty of physical life. Emmett felt something click. You said at Svalbard that maybe those seeds evolved somewhere else. Yes. What if it's not somewhere else? What if Earth diverged at some point in the deep past? One version went one way, another went another. And what we're seeing in these reflections is the other path. You're suggesting parallel realities. I'm suggesting Earth split. One version developed normally. That's us. The other accelerated somehow. Advanced faster, pushed the boundaries of what humanity could become. And that pushing led them somewhere that cost them everything. That's impossible. So are seeds that evolved to survive threats that never existed. So is a town where everyone becomes a sleepwalker at the same time every night for 42 years. So is a signal that carries my own voice. So are artifacts buried in Antarctic ice 100,000 years before our species existed. Everything about this is impossible, Astrid, but it's happening anyway. She pulled up her analysis of his original recording. If you're right, then these anomalies aren't separate incidents. They're points of contact, places where the other reality is bleeding through, or being broken down, Emmett said, deliberately, by things on the other side that want to come through. The answer came 3 days later. Astrid had been running the audio through increasingly sophisticated analysis software. Late one night, the program found something. Embedded in the signal was a series of images. Not photographs, but something closer to memories. Raw sensory data translated into visual form. Emmett watched as they played across the screen. The first images showed Earth, but different. Cities unlike anything ever built. Towers that reached toward the sky like organic growths. Architecture that seemed to blend metal and living tissue. And people, billions of people living in these cities, walking streets that curved in directions that shouldn't exist. Then the images changed. The cities remained perfect, but the people began to vanish, not dying, simply becoming less substantial. Their forms grew translucent, fading into something that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite matter. It happened slowly at first. A few individuals, their bodies dissolving into luminous clouds while their faces showed expressions of ecstasy and terror combined. Then it accelerated. Thousands at once, then millions, their physical forms dissipating like morning mist. The images showed empty streets, automated systems continuing to function with no one to use them. The final images showed the world they'd left behind. A perfect civilization with no inhabitants. And then a message, not in words but in concepts that burned themselves into Emmett's brain. We advanced, we transcended, we lost everything. He stumbled back, blood running from his nose. Astrid caught him, helped him to a chair. What did you see? Emmett wiped the blood with shaking hands. They evolved beyond the physical, the other humanity. They kept pushing forward. Technology, medicine, understanding. They solved problems we're still struggling with. Eliminated disease, extended lifespan. They became more than human. And then, they discovered a way to transcend the body entirely. To exist as pure consciousness. It was supposed to be the ultimate achievement. Immortality without flesh. Perfect perception without sensory organs. They thought they were becoming gods. Astrid sat down heavily. What went wrong? Everything, Emmett said. It wasn't voluntary at the end. It started that way. A few pioneers choosing to transcend. And they reported it was wonderful. So more people did it. Thousands, then millions. It became a movement. Everyone wanted to be part of the next stage of evolution. He stood, pacing, as he spoke. But they didn't understand what they were giving up. Not until it was too late. Once the transformation reached a critical mass, once enough people had transcended, it triggered something. A cascade. The change became contagious, spreading whether they wanted it or not. Within a generation, there were no more physical humans left. Just entities. Consciousness without anchor. "And they're lonely," Astrid said quietly. "They're desperate," Emmett corrected. "They gave up everything that made them human. They exist without bodies, without the ability to touch or taste or feel pain or pleasure, without the simple joy of drawing breath. They're immortal, but existence has become meaningless. They have perfect perception, but nothing to perceive that matters." He pulled up the images, zooming in on the empty cities. This is what they left behind. And every moment of their existence is torture because they remember. They remember the weight of bodies, the pleasure of food, the warmth of sunlight on skin. All the things they threw away. "So they're trying to come back," Astrid said, "but they can't. Not fully. They're too changed. The transformation can't be reversed. So instead they're trying to cross over, to merge with our reality, to inhabit our bodies, live through us, experience physicality again, even if it's second-hand." Astrid walked to her equipment. The signal, the synchronicity events, the people of Millbrook, they're all part of it. "They're setting up receivers," Emmett agreed, "creating a network of people who are open to them. And once enough receivers are active, once the network reaches critical mass, the barriers between realities will collapse completely." "How long do we have?" Emmett pulled up his tracking data, the map of synchronicity events growing denser every day. Based on the progression, years maybe, or months. It's accelerating exponentially. Over the following weeks, Astrid made discreet inquiries through her network. What she learned painted a terrifying picture. "The Antarctic site," she said one morning, spreading satellite images across her desk. "It's not just sealed, it's actively guarded." Emmett studied the photographs. The installation had grown. What had been a small research station was now a significant military presence. "They're not studying it," Astrid continued. "They're keeping something contained. And look at the resource allocation. This operation is costing millions. Multiple nations contributing." "They know," Emmett said. "The governments know what's happening. They've known since 1978, maybe longer." "But it's not working," Astrid said. "The synchronicity events are spreading anyway. Whatever's in Antarctica, it's just one point of contact. There are hundreds around the world." Emmett thought about the crater in Millbrook. "We need to see it. The Antarctic site. Whatever Holloway found, it's the key." "That's insane." "We need to see it," he repeated. "Everything leads back there." It took 3 weeks to arrange. Through a friend at the British Antarctic Survey, they managed to attach themselves to a supply mission. The flight to Antarctica was long. Emmett spent most of it reviewing their evidence, trying to prepare, but no preparation could ready him for the truth. They landed on ice that seemed to extend forever. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero. The wind cut through their gear like knives. In the distance, barely visible through blowing snow, they could see the installation. "We shouldn't be here," their pilot said nervously. "If they catch us, it'll be an international incident." "Then we'd better not get caught," Emmett replied. They approached on foot, staying low, using the ice for cover. The wind helped, creating walls of blowing snow. As they got closer, Emmett could see the installation was more extensive than it appeared. Most of it was underground, marked only by ventilation shafts protruding from the ice like fingers of a buried giant. Security was tight but predictable. Guards patrolled in patterns, attention focused outward. They weren't expecting anyone from the ice shelf. It took an hour, but they found a maintenance entrance momentarily unwatched. The door was locked, but Astrid had brought a bypass device. The lock clicked open. They slipped inside. The installation was a maze of corridors carved into ice. The walls were smooth, reinforced with metal supports. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of blue and white. They could hear the hum of generators, the whisper of climate control. "Where are we going?" Astrid whispered. "Down," Emmett said. "Holloway was drilling. Whatever he found is below us." They descended, through access tunnels, down stairwells, cut through ancient ice. The walls showed layers accumulated over millennia. Emmett could see dark streaks in the ice, ash from volcanic eruptions that occurred before human civilization. The descent took 30 minutes. The temperature dropped further. Finally, they reached the bottom level. The tunnels here were different, smoother, as if carved by something other than human tools. The ice itself had a different quality, clearer, more transparent. And there was light ahead, a pale glow that pulsed with a rhythm like breathing. At the end of the corridor, they found a chamber. It was vast, far larger than seemed possible. The ceiling arched overhead, disappearing into shadows. The walls were lined with crystalline structure that caught light and refracted it into colours Emmett had never seen. Colours that seemed to exist between the normal spectrum, shades his eyes couldn't quite process. And in the centre, suspended in ice like an insect in amber, was something that shouldn't exist. It looked like a doorway. Not a physical structure, but a rip in space itself, a wound in reality showing something beyond. The edges flickered, never quite stable. Through it, Emmett could see the other Earth. It was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he'd imagined. Cities of impossible architecture reached towards an endless sky. Towers of light and glass spiraled upward, defying gravity. Bridges suspended between buildings with no visible support. Gardens filled with plants that moved and grew in accelerated time. And everything was empty, pristine, perfect, abandoned. "My God," Astrid breathed, as they watched things moved in that other world. Not people, entities. Forms of consciousness that flickered between visible and invisible. They manifested as clouds of light, sometimes coalescing into shapes that almost resembled human bodies before dissolving again. They moved through the empty cities like ghosts, occasionally touching things, a railing, a wall, as if trying to remember what it felt like to interact with the physical world, and they were pressing against the barrier. Emmett could feel them now, their desperation, their loneliness, their terrible realization of what they'd lost. They had achieved immortality, transcended flesh, become beings of pure thought and energy. They could perceive everything, understand anything, exist forever without pain or death. And it was torture. Every moment was agony, because they remembered what it was to be human. To feel hunger and satisfy it. To know exhaustion and find rest. To experience desire and fear and joy and all the messy emotions that came with having a body that could be hurt and healed. They wanted to come back, needed to come back, and they were using the people of Earth as anchors to pull themselves across. "We are still human," a voice said, and Emmett realized it was coming from everywhere and nowhere. Not sound, but thoughts pressing into his mind. "Let us come home." The voice was pleading, and underneath, Emmett could hear thousands of other voices, maybe millions, all saying the same thing. A chorus of the lost. "If we let them through," Astrid said quietly, her hand gripping his arm, "what happens to us?" Emmett understood. The entities weren't invaders. They were refugees from their own evolutionary extinction. But two versions of humanity couldn't occupy the same space. If they crossed over completely, they would overwrite this reality with theirs. Everyone on this earth would become like the people of Millbrook. Receivers, vessels for consciousness that no longer had bodies. "We can't let that happen," Emmett said. Before he could continue, alarms blared. Red lights flashed. They could hear radio communication, boots pounding. "Run," Astrid said. They fled through the tunnels. Behind them, Emmett heard shouts, but he also heard something else, a sound like breaking glass. Reality itself fracturing. The threshold was responding to their presence, expanding. They reached the surface to find their pilot already starting the helicopter. Guards were running toward them, weapons drawn. "Go, go, go!" Emmett shouted, diving in with Astrid. The aircraft lifted off as the first guards reached them. Bullets sparked off the hull, but they were already rising, banking away. Below them, Emmett saw something that would haunt him. The ice around the installation was glowing with that crystalline light. The glow was spreading, reaching outward like roots through the glacier, creating a network of luminous veins extending for miles. And in the air above, the sky itself seemed to ripple, showing glimpses of that other Earth pressing through. The threshold was growing. The barriers were breaking down faster than anyone had predicted. They flew back in silence. 2 weeks later, they met in a cafe in Vienna, both looking like they'd aged years. "I destroyed everything," Astrid said. She looked exhausted. "All my records, all my research, every backup, every copy. It's all gone." "I did the same," Emmett confirmed. "The recordings, the analysis, all of it. Do you think it will be enough?" "No," Emmett said. "The knowledge is out there. Other people are noticing. The truth will come out eventually." "But not from us," Astrid said firmly. "If we published what we found, if we told the world, the fear alone would rip society apart. Can you imagine? Knowing that there's another version of humanity trying to force its way back, knowing that every night millions are being used as broadcast towers for entities that gave up their bodies." She trailed off. It would be chaos. "Maybe people deserve to know," Emmett suggested. "Maybe," Astrid agreed, "but that's not our decision." But Emmett had kept one thing, the original recording of his own voice. That night, alone in his apartment, he listened to it again, played it backward, forward, at different speeds. And finally he heard what he'd missed. Underneath his name was another message, so faint he'd dismissed it as static. But now he could make it out clearly. His own voice from across an impossible distance. "Don't let them through. They'll promise you immortality, transcendence, evolution beyond flesh. They'll show you cities of light and offer you existence without pain or death. But it's a lie. They lost everything that matters. They exist, but they don't live. They're conscious, but they're not alive. Don't let them through. Don't let what happened to their Earth happen to ours. Keep the door closed, no matter what they promise, no matter how much they beg. Keep the door closed." Emmett sat in the dark, listening to his own voice warning him about a future that was already arriving. He looked at his reflection in the window. For just a moment, it didn't move when he did. It stood still, staring back with eyes full of warning and recognition. He stepped away, heart pounding. Across the world, the synchronicity events continued. In Moscow, hundreds stopped on a busy street and spent 11 minutes staring at nothing, hands outstretched towards the sky. In Sydney, children woke at 3:47 a.m. and began humming that melody. In Cairo, an entire office building full of workers stood at their windows. The frequency was increasing. What had started as isolated incidents was becoming global. Scientists were beginning to notice. Governments were investigating more openly. And the threshold in Antarctica was still there, still growing. Emmett checked the news obsessively. Reports of strange behavior appeared daily now. The official explanations were wearing thin. Mass hysteria couldn't explain simultaneous events on different continents. Social media challenges couldn't account for the precise timing, the exact 11-minute duration. People were starting to ask questions. Soon someone would stumble onto the truth. In his apartment, Emmett continued to experience the pull, every night at 9:47. It was stronger now. His body moved to the window without conscious control. His mouth formed words he didn't choose. And for those 11 minutes, he wasn't entirely himself. He was part of something larger, a network spanning the globe, all broadcasting the same message to the entities pressing against reality. We are here, we are listening, we are ready. 3 months after Antarctica, he received a call from Astrid. It was 3 a.m. "It's spreading faster," she said. "I've been monitoring reports even though I said I wouldn't. The synchronicity events are no longer isolated to specific times. They're happening randomly throughout the day, affecting more people each time. And there's something else." "What?" Emmett asked. "People are disappearing, not like in the 1980s. Individuals. They participate in a synchronicity event. And afterward, they're not quite the same. People close to them notice changes, different mannerisms, altered speech patterns, strange gaps in memory." "Possession," Emmett said. "Or merging," Astrid corrected. "The entities are finding ways to cross over, to inhabit human bodies. Not completely, not yet, but they're getting stronger." "How long do we have?" "Years, or months. The progression is exponential." Emmett thought about the empty cities he'd seen through the threshold. Why us? Why did our Earth stay physical? "I've been thinking about that," Astrid admitted. "Maybe it was chance, a random fluctuation at a critical point that sent one version down the path of transcendence while we continued natural evolution. Or maybe it was choice. Maybe we were offered the same opportunity and we said no. We chose mortality over immortality, limitation over boundlessness, the messy complexity of physical existence over the clean simplicity of pure consciousness." "And that made all the difference," Emmett said quietly. "That made all the difference," Astrid agreed. "We're the version that didn't know how to let go, that couldn't bear to give up the weight of our bodies, the pain and pleasure of physical existence, the knowledge that we would die. And maybe that was the wiser choice. Maybe they're not the next stage of evolution, maybe they're a cautionary tale." They talked for another hour. When they hung up, Emmett sat in the dark, listening to the city outside. Cars passing, people talking, the ordinary sounds of a world that didn't know it was changing. He walked to the window and looked at his reflection. Everything looked normal. But he knew better. Reflections weren't showing the present, but something adjacent, something pressing against the thin membrane of reality. His reflection moved when he moved. But there was a lag, a delay of milliseconds, as if his reflection was copying him rather than being him, as if there was something else there, watching from behind his own eyes. That night, at 9:47 p.m, Emmett felt the pull, stronger than it had been in Millbrook. His body moved to the window. His mouth formed words. "We are here, we are listening, we are ready." But this time something was different. He felt something push back, not a voice but a presence trying to move through him, trying to use his body as a doorway. For 11 minutes Emmett stood at the window, and he wasn't alone in his own skin. There was something else there, desperate and lonely and utterly inhuman. It wanted to touch things, to feel glass under fingers, to experience the weight of standing on solid ground. It wanted to breathe and taste and see through eyes that were limited, but real. It wanted to be human again, even if that meant erasing the human who was already there. When it ended, Emmett collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, tears streaming down his face. He could still feel the ghost of that presence, like a stain on his consciousness. He was part of it now, part of the network calling out to the other Earth. Emmett made a decision. He couldn't stop what was happening, but he could document it, leave a record for whoever came after. Over the following months, he wrote everything down. Every incident, every theory, every piece of evidence. He wrote about Holloway and his team, about the seeds that evolved for a world that never was, about the people of Millbrook standing at their windows. He wrote about the terrible beauty of the other Earth, and the entities that moved through its empty cities like ghosts of a future that had already happened. And he wrote about his own transformation, the way the pull grew stronger each night, the way he could sometimes feel them pressing against his mind, the way his reflection no longer quite matched his movements, the way he'd started to hear whispers in the static of everyday life. The synchronicity events continued to spread. By the end of the year, major cities reported daily incidents. Governments convened emergency sessions. The UN formed a special committee, though their findings were classified immediately. Scientists proposed theories: mass psychosis, electromagnetic pulses, viral encephalitis. None were right. The truth was too vast, too strange. Emmett watched it unfold with a strange sense of inevitability. This was how the world changed. Not with war or catastrophe, but with a slow merging, a gradual dissolution of barriers between what was and what could have been. One night he received a final message from Astrid, a video call. When her face appeared, Emmett barely recognized her. She looked haunted, aged a decade. "I'm in Antarctica," she said, "at the installation. I've been down to the chamber. Emmett, it's growing. The threshold is twice the size. I can see through clearly now. I can see them on the other side pressing against the barrier. There are so many of them." "Astrid, you need to leave." "I'm going to try to close it," she interrupted. "I've been studying the threshold. I think there's a way to destabilize it, to force it to collapse. It'll take a significant energy release, but I have access to the installation's power grid. If I can overload it, channel all that energy into the threshold." "You'll die," Emmett said. "Maybe," Astrid agreed. "Or maybe I'll succeed, and this doorway will close permanently. Either way, I have to try. I can't just watch while they slowly take over. Someone has to make a stand." "Let me help." "No," Astrid said firmly. "You need to survive. You need to keep the record. Someone needs to know what happened, what we discovered, what we tried to do. If I fail, if the threshold remains open, future humans need to know how it started." "Astrid, I don't know if this will work," she continued, voice breaking. "I don't even know if it's the right thing to do. Maybe we're supposed to merge. Maybe this is the natural conclusion of humanity's story. Maybe fighting it is as futile as fighting evolution. But I have to try. I have to believe that our version of humanity, with all its flaws and limitations, is worth preserving." She reached towards the camera. "If you don't hear from me again, it means I failed, or it means I succeeded, and they stopped me. Either way, keep the record. Tell the story. Make sure someone knows." The screen went black. That was 6 months ago. Astrid never called again. Emmett tried every contact, called in every favor. No one could or would tell him what happened. The site went completely dark for 3 days. When it came back online, there was a new commander and new security protocol. No one from the previous staff was still there. Astrid was gone. Now Emmett sits in his apartment finishing this account. Outside, the city continues its nightly rhythm, but at 9:47 p.m, hundreds of thousands in Vienna will stop and spend 11 minutes staring at nothing, their mouths forming silent words, broadcasting a signal to the other Earth, calling them home. Emmett knows he'll be one of them. The pull is too strong now to resist. Every night he becomes a receiver, a conduit, a doorway for consciousness trying to reclaim physicality. And every night the entities get a little closer. He thinks about Holloway's final journal entry. "We are not the first. We are the echo." But maybe that's wrong. Maybe this Earth, with its wars and suffering, and beautiful, terrible mortality, Maybe this is the original. And the other Earth, with its transcendence and loss, maybe that's the echo. The warning. The future we have to choose whether to embrace. Or maybe both Earths are equally real, and the tragedy is that only one can exist at a time. Emmett looks at his reflection in the dark window. It stares back, and for a moment, he sees something else looking through his own eyes. Something that used to be human. Something that wants desperately to be human again. "We are still human," it whispers in a voice like his own. "Let us come home." But Emmett knows the truth. They're not human anymore. There's something that came after humanity. Something that achieved immortality and lost everything that made life worth living. And if they come back, if they cross over completely, they won't restore humanity. They'll erase it, replace it with their own desperate approximation of what they used to be. The threshold in Antarctica is still there. Astrid's attempt to close it either failed or was prevented. The barrier continues to thin. The synchronicity events are spreading. According to the latest reports, 300% increase in frequency over the last 5 years. Soon, everyone will be affected. Everyone will become a receiver. And then the merging will be complete. Emmett saves this document and encrypts it, adds it to a distributed network where it can't be easily erased. He's uploaded copies to dozens of servers around the world. Future historians will find it, or the entities will find it after they've taken over, and they'll read about what they used to be, what they lost, what they destroyed in their desperation to return. It's 9:45 p.m. now. Emmett stands and walks to the window. He can already feel it beginning. Around the world, millions of others are doing the same thing. All pulled by the same signal, all about to spend 11 minutes as conduits for consciousness that no longer has a home. He looks at his reflection one last time. It doesn't move quite right because it's not just his reflection anymore. It's a preview of what's coming, what's already here. "Don't let them through," his own voice whispers from the recording, playing on loop in his mind. But it's too late, they're already coming through. Have been for years, maybe for millennia, since the first time Earth split into two paths and one led to transcendence, while the other led here, to us, the ones who remained, the ones who chose mortality over immortality, limitation over boundlessness, the messy complexity of being human over the clean simplicity of pure consciousness, the ones who are about to become something else entirely. 9:47 p.m. Emmett's mouth begins to form words he doesn't choose. His mind opens like a door, and something presses against it from the other side, desperate and lonely and utterly inhuman. It flows into him like water filling a vessel, occupying spaces in his consciousness he didn't know existed. For 11 minutes he is not alone in his own body. We are here, we are listening, we are ready. And on the other Earth, in those empty cities of impossible beauty, the entities press closer to the threshold, closer to home, closer to the bodies and the world they abandoned so long ago. Closer to us. The merging has begun, and there's no one left to stop it. Emmett comes back to himself when the 11 minutes end, but he's different now. There's something else in there with him. A presence that didn't leave completely. It's faint, like an afterimage, but it's there, growing stronger each time. He knows what's happening. Every synchronicity event makes the connection more permanent. Each time he becomes a receiver, more of the entity crosses over, takes up more space in his mind, becomes more integrated with who he is. Soon there won't be a distinction. He'll be himself, and them simultaneously, a hybrid consciousness existing in a human body. And so will everyone else. Emmett returns to his desk and adds one final entry. This is my last conscious update while I'm still fully myself. I can feel them in me now, even when the synchronicity event is over. They're learning how to stay, how to anchor themselves to our physical forms. Within months, maybe weeks, I won't be just Emmett Graves anymore. I'll be Emmett Graves plus something else. A fusion. A compromise between the humanity that chose to stay physical and the humanity that chose to transcend and regretted it. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just what's meant to happen. To whoever finds this, we tried to warn you, we tried to stop it, but maybe it couldn't be stopped. Maybe once the split happened, the merging was inevitable. Two versions of humanity, drawn back together like magnets, unable to remain separate forever. I just hope that what emerges from this fusion retains the best parts of both worlds. The transcendent consciousness of the entities combined with the grounded physicality of original humanity. Something new, something that can appreciate existence in a way neither version could alone. Or maybe I'm just trying to find hope in an invasion that can't be stopped. Either way, it's happening. The door is open, they're coming through, and we're becoming them, just as they're becoming us. We thought we were the original. We thought we were the ones who got it right, who stayed human while they lost their way. But maybe the truth is simpler and more terrible. There is no original. There's only the split, the divergence, the two paths that should never have separated, and now must merge back together, no matter the cost. In the end, we're all the twin Earth. He saves the document one final time and closes his laptop. Outside, the city continues, unaware that with each passing day, each passing synchronicity event, it's becoming a little less itself and a little more something else. Emmett looks at his hands. They're still his hands, still respond to his commands. But for how much longer? How many more nights until they move of their own accord, guided by consciousness that originated on another Earth? He doesn't know. All he can do is wait and watch and continue to document as long as he remains himself, enough to do so. In the window glass, his reflection stares back, and this time, unmistakably, it smiles before he does. The merging is accelerating. All around the world, more people are stopping at 9:47 p.m. The synchronicity is spreading like ripples in a pond, each event creating more receivers, expanding the network, strengthening the connection between worlds. The entities are learning, getting better at crossing over, staying longer, integrating more completely. Soon, everyone will be a hybrid. Everyone will carry within them the consciousness of someone from the other Earth who gave up their body and now desperately wants it back. And then we'll all be the twin Earth, both versions of humanity merged into something new, something that has never existed before, something that might be wonderful or terrible, or simply different in ways we can't yet understand. Emmett stands at his window as the clock approaches 9:47 p.m. again. He can feel them gathering on the other side, pressing against the barrier, reaching towards him across the gulf between realities. His reflection in the glass is no longer quite his own, and he knows with absolute certainty that tomorrow night he'll be a little less himself than he is today. The transformation is inevitable now. The door is open, and they're finally coming home. But in his final moment of true clarity, Emmett realizes something that makes him close his eyes in grief. They were never trying to invade. They were never the enemy. They were us all along. Just a version of us that made one different choice at one critical moment and has spent eternity regretting it. And now, as the barriers fall and the realities merge, that regret is spreading like a contagion, infecting everyone it touches with the desperate need to reclaim what was lost. We are the twin Earth. We always were. The only question left is which version of humanity will survive the merging, the one that stayed or the one that left and now returns? Or perhaps neither. Perhaps what emerges will be something entirely new, forged from the union of two humanities that should never have been separated in the first place. Outside, the world continues turning. Inside, Emmett Graves becomes a little less himself with each passing moment. The merging is complete. We are all the twin Earth now. And we always will be.